Hey there, my name is Alex, I am the Silver Mont, and in this video we're going to talk about the Demon's Souls remaster, the remake. Quick disclaimer, I wrote this script back in, I think, November, when the game came out. Never made the video because the whole topic just seemed too negative, and I knew how most of the comments would be, and a lot of the complaints people are going to have about this video are kind of justified. That said, I do get a lot of people asking me, why aren't you playing Demon's Souls Remaster? What do you think of Demon's Souls Remaster? And so on and so forth. So, before I get into reading the script I wrote months ago, just want to point out, if you like Demon's Souls Remaster, that's great. I'm not trying to make you hate it, not trying to change anyone's mind, just going to tell you what I think about the remaster. So with that out of the way, let's get to it. As it turns out, the Demon's Souls remaster has taken a baffling approach to the game's visual style. Just about every decision I've seen taken is the wrong one. There's an expression, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. There are many other expressions, some of which can't be repeated here. But before I really get into this, I'm going to point out I haven't played Demon's Souls Remake. Then I'm not going to be talking about the gameplay at all in this video. From all accounts, the gameplay is essentially identical and untouched from the original. In this video I will be talking about the visual changes and to a lesser extent the soundtrack, and why I think these changes are bad. The atmosphere, the attention to detail, the tone, these are things that elevated Demon's Souls. Without them you're left with a kinda janky action RPG, and as it turns out whoever was in charge of the changes for the remake didn't just flat out ignore original concepts for some unknown reason. If they were available on the internet for everyone, you would think they'd be available for the people doing the official remake. But at times it also flat out didn't use any semblance of logic when making design decisions. What can we blame this on? Poor direction? Ignorance? A lack of care? Too much outsourcing? I don't know. Now, as we get into this, I'm going to begin with a quote from the president of Sony Worldwide Studios, circa 2011. For my personal experience with Demon's Souls, when it was close to final, I spent about 2 hours playing it, and after 2 hours I was still standing at the beginning of the game. I said, "This is crap, this is an unbelievably bad game," so I put it aside. Why am I bringing up a 10-year-old quote? Well, no particular reason, I just want you to have that sentiment in mind as we go forward. But oh boy, where to begin? I obviously won't be showing gameplay because I don't have the game, but there are thousands of videos and I'm sure lots of people have done let's plays of it, so you can go and look at your favourite uploader who does stuff like that if you want to know what I'm talking about, if you don't already know. But why don't we start with something I noticed in the original trailer, the changes in the architecture. There's a very simple way to highlight the point I'm going to make here. If you've played Dark Souls, you'll be familiar with the Anor Londo Cathedral, and I'm not going to show it because I want you to picture the Anor Londo Cathedral in your mind. Whether it's the small details or the obvious details, what is the first thing that comes to mind for you? For me, it's the huge gate that you can open up, which is, guarded by those two giant dudes outside of it. But you have the picture of the Anor Londo Cathedral in your mind, well, keep it there. Let's assume there was a Dark Souls remake which changed the cathedral into Sen's Fortress. An extreme example, perhaps, but this is more or less what's been going on at times with the Demon's Souls remake. If you look at the buildings in the original Demon's Souls Boletaria, these are very stark buildings. They are fortresses, crenulations, arrow slits, no flying buttresses, no ornamentation. The difference between a fortress and a cathedral should be obvious. Why has this been changed? Well, maybe the PS3 wasn't powerful enough to render all of this stuff, but concept art still has it like that, and there's a reason it's like that. You might think, who would even notice? But, well, I noticed. Even if you don't think you noticed, I'm sure your brain picks up on things which help set the tone, even if you're not really consciously aware of them. Even if you don't consciously notice that the sky is overcast, it adds to the tone and you do notice it, subconsciously. Then we have the fact that vegetation's been added to parts of Boletaria where it was absent before. Well, what's the big deal about a few plants and overgrown buildings, you might ask? Well, When you see an abandoned building overgrown with vegetation, chances are it's been abandoned for around 5 years, give or take. I'm no expert on plant growth, but this isn't Fallout. This isn't Dark Souls. Demon Souls does not take place many years after some catastrophic event. It isn't after the fall, it is during the fall. Again, Demon Souls lore, not my strong point, but quick recap, quick summary. King Allant brings back the Soul Arts, which then in turn leads to the deep fog blanketing the kingdom. One of the Twin Fangs managed to escape the fog and told the world what was happening. This led to all sorts of people seeking out Boletaria. Kingdom is largely overrun and collapsed by the time of the game, but it is nowhere close to Dark Souls being generations or hundreds of years later. It's implied that this is happening right now. Almost every NPC you meet in the game is a human. They haven't been there for hundreds of years. Simply put, the kingdom shouldn't be in such a state where there are plants growing up through the tiles and whatnot. And then, what is up with the Flame Lurker arena? In the original, we have the entrance to a temple of some sort, wherein we find the Dragon God. In the remake, we have some sort of Diablo 3 or World of Warcraft arena with big evil horns and spikes, some sort of special arena made specifically for Flame Lurker, instead of being a place where he happened to show up, which was the entrance to another building. Maybe you're thinking, well, Flame Lurker's been sealed in that temple since ancient times, which might make more sense if they built an evil looking temple to contain something evil. Though I can't see them having put that much thought into it. It looks like they went, Flame Lurker is a demon, so his arena must look demon-y too. The final point I have about structures, buildings, and so forth would be the archstones themselves. I mean, just look at the archstones in the remake. Do you see the problem? The archstone has been prettied up considerably. Whilst it is at least true enough to the original in both design and intent, the logic behind it is thrown out the window. See, the original archstone looks like something appropriate to the period and the style of Demon Souls. This new one looks incredibly ornate, complex, and materially diverse, but it's pretty infeasible for this to, well, exist. It's something that has clearly been modelled on a computer, or is magical. Now, I know what you might be thinking, yeah, magic, look what the Nexus is, it's a giant magical building. That's a fair point, but again, I'm strongly of the impression, taking everything else into account, that isn't the case. Rather so they just didn't think about this object's history. Who made this object? How did they make it? When did they make it? They just went, let's make it look fancy and pretty, because we can improve the doodads in the world. That's enough about architecture, so let's move on to the characters. Aside from Satsuki now being some sort of Fu Manchu caricature, this Fat Minister design is perfect. Perfect as an example of just how this remake misses. The point shoots so far from the mark that it's a wonder they didn't get on a plane for Australia and end up on the moon. The Fat Minister is, I think, safe to say, the most memorable enemy from Demon Souls, not including bosses. The new design is a Left 4 Dead boomer squeezed into a suit. I probably don't need to explain to you why the Fat Minister was unsettling, but, well, let's do it anyway. You see the face? It's like a death mask, perpetually grinning, even when a Fat Minister is penetrated by the Penetrator. Is it his face? Is it a mask? Is it a mask that has become his face? Is it his face that became a mask? Who can say? That's a large part of why it's so unsettling or surreal. You can't really make the distinction. Here in the remake, well, yeah, that's his face. He has a gross, ugly, fat face. He's now covered with disgusting sores, blisters, and the like, with an exposed gut too, because why not? These ministers, these officials, are the ones running Boletaria now. They are twisted, but turning them into so fat I spill out of my clothes and I'm covered in pustules diminishes them. Consider this quote by Miyazaki. I'll usually tell the designers that flat-out grotesque or splatter-type designs will not get past me. A colleague then remarked that when he submitted a design of the undead dragon covered in maggots, Miyazaki vetoed it, saying it wasn't dignified. Don't rely on the gross factor. Instead, try and convey the deep sorrow of a magnificent beast doomed to an endless descent into ruin. Those are Miyazaki's words, not mine. Now we have the Fat Ministers as perfect examples of gross factor. And you might be thinking, well, that's hypocritical, look at Bloodborne. But the logic holds up, even there. It was a point in Bloodborne that the nobler the soul, the more you resisted beasthood, the more twisted a beast would you make. See Ludwig, pure nightmare fuel. But throughout the fight, and in particular the cutscene, you see his restored humanity in a sense. Somehow, this horrible, disgusting creature manages to evoke the image of a knight as he raises his blade in salute to you, the player. I'm happy to debate the point with any Bloodborne boss in the comments if that is your thing, but also, again, Bloodborne is an action horror game. Demon's Souls and Dark Souls are not. Either way, there's no mystery to the Fat Ministers now, they are just boomers in suits. But if you want more proof of them straight up ignoring the original concept art, just take a look at the monumental. Clean, off-white linen, changed to raggedy rags. There are enough things for me to spend hours going on about this, but instead of picking apart every single perceived flaw, I'm just trying to give broader examples of how I believe they're missing the point and messing up. And if you don't have an understanding of something, why are you the one remaking it? But maybe that's Sony's fault, who knows? But final point about characters, King Aland, or that is the False King. For starters, the remake redubbed the lines pointlessly and changed some of the wording pointlessly. The new dialogue doesn't have the same impact. In other cases, the wording is the same, but the performances or the direction aren't quite the same, they're not as good. Maiden Estraya, for example.
You killed him, didn't you? Very well. I can no longer resist you. Do as you like. Take your precious demon soul. You killed him, didn't you? Very well. I can no longer resist you. Do as you like. Take your precious demon soul.
The delivery of the line in the remake is poor by comparison. I know a lot of people might be talking about the music, but it's not something I can really cover that well myself, as I just plain don't know much about music. I cannot measure its qualities. I can tell you if I think something sounds good or bad, but I can't explain why, because again, I don't know anything about music. But Alant though, before we even talk about him, I've got to point out the outfit. The original appears to be wearing silk, whereas the new one is wearing cotton. It's clearly some sort of ceremonial outfit, it's not battle garb. Silk is a more kingly raiment than cotton. Also, it's clearly ceremonial, it's not battle armor, so why does he now have metal pauldrons? What a ridiculous and pointless change. Gotta think about the model too. Whilst the remake undoubtedly has more polygons and better shaders, it just doesn't look right. There's two main reasons for this, the eyes and the angle. The original Alant is looking down at you, at us, the player. His face is angled to give an imposingly gaunt and ominous mien. For the eyes, that is really important. You remember how Mass Effect Andromeda, the NPCs had lifeless, soulless eyes, which was like a big meme at the time? And to add something new, because I wrote this script back in November, remember? But a very recent example, there was a show on Amazon called Invincible. I was watching the first episode of that and I was like, wow, these characters just have lifeless eyes staring at each other in conversations. Very uncanny. But the Demon's Souls remake has that too. Andromeda syndrome, if you will. Eyes are the single most important part of the face to get right. They are the window to the soul. And if there's one thing you want to get right, it's the eyes. You ever wonder why anime and cartoons always make eyes so huge and expressive? There's a reason for that. It's because eyes are important in reading someone's expression. They are the most important part of your face. From seem to understand that here, whereas the remake has an empty blank stare. Now, granted, you might be thinking that is appropriate for a false king, a demon, an idol, but again, I'm pretty sure it's not intentional. It's incompetence because every single character who has eyes in the remake has that kind of dead-eyed staring. Apart from the Maiden in Black, because you can't see her eyes. To finish this video up, I'd like to talk about the intro cinematic, because even this has issues that, whilst not directly associated with the game, because you know, it's the intro, they are emblematic of the misunderstandings that make up the lifeblood of this remake. Now, as mentioned, I'm not a music expert, I'm the opposite of an expert, I'm a music idiot, but the original's music does sound better to me. There is depth and impact to the beats, whereas the remake sounds muffled. It sounds the equivalent of talking like this. But then we have our action scene. In the original one, the Slayer of Demons, in our establishing shot, has already been surrounded and beset all sides by enemies. In the remake, he clearly has just arrived, he's not surrounded, and he willingly charges into a horde of enemies whilst grunting and pulling off 300-esque strikes, as if he's in Dynasty Warriors, as if he's Leonidas. In the remake, he takes out 8 enemies, whereas in the original he takes out 3. The majority of the scene is him putting away a single enemy. We then have a shot showing him from, presumably, the skeleton warrior's perspective, letting us know that something is watching him. In the remake, the skeleton just pops up like, hey! Our first proper reveal of the skeleton in the original is as the knight is climbing to his knees. The enemy is seen from below with the camera positioned behind our hero, making them seem small and weak and in trouble. In the remake, a split second after the skeleton is established, some phantoms awkwardly walk into frame in what is such a lame reveal that it makes you wonder why they bothered. It just comes off as hilarious. Conversely, in the original, you have a long, lingering shot as our hero just about evades an attack. Then we have our reveal of the phantoms, quite literally from our hero's perspective. We see them obscured by helmet and skeleton both, but we see something is there. Is this an enemy or a friend? Then it lands an attack on the skeleton, compared to the remake where the new trio makes some sort of Power Rangers pose before shooting it. Then comes the most frustrating part. 2 more phantoms pop up from the ground like they were shooting out of Mario pipes, compared to the amazing shot in the original, 360 panning shot where phantoms slowly emerge in the distinct summoned pose that, you know, happens in Dark Souls and Demon Souls. The rather slow realization that something is behind our hero as the camera zooms in on him for he turns is replaced with him just feeling a rumble, then watching as Deathwing plops down on Stormwind in front of him. Overmuch is made of the Dragon God's reveal, whereas we essentially see it along with our hero in the original as it rears up over the walls. The camera is close, tight on the dragon, and letting us focus on nothing else. There isn't a giant moon behind it for dramatic effect because they went, this shot's boring, let's stick the moon there because we need to shove more things into the frame. You don't. You really don't. The focus is the dragon god. You don't need anything else in the shot. And that's all I have to say, because if I keep going, I will be at this for hours. I'm incredibly disappointed. If you ever wanted to discuss the notion of can video games be art, this would be a great example of the difference between art and a factory product. The car that is put together by hand might not be as technically apt as one from an assembly line. The leather jacket your grandfather gave your father before it came to you, it might be scuffed and worn next to that brand new polyester one, but the polyester jacket will fall to pieces. Nobody will want to buy that factory assembled car, one of thousands of identical products in, 50 years from now. Demon Souls should be remembered, but this remake, not so much.